Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is another one of our partner series. We do a series of joint webinars with CircleCI and a lot of our community partners. Generally, our community partners are folks who are active in developing orbs, and we're going to talk about what orbs are in a minute. But to really kick things off, I'm Christopher Black. I'm a solutions engineer at Circle, and then joining us is Heinrich Trotzig, who's a software engineer and founder of Happo.io. Next slide, Heinrich. Heinrich's driving the slide presentation. So quick introductions. Again, I'm Christopher Black, a solutions engineer here with CircleCI. I've been here for about three and a half years. First 2 years here at the company, I was on the SRE team. So my background is predominantly ops, DevOps, infra kind of stuff. And then Heinrich?
Yeah, I'm in Stockholm. This is a map of Sweden right here. If you see my video. I'm a software engineer at Happo.io. And yeah, I'll introduce myself when we get to my slides as well.
Yeah,
Sorry.
More formal introduction. Real quick, let's run through the agenda. So we already covered introductions. Heinrich's going to talk a little bit more about his background. We're going to talk about orbs. What the heck are orbs and why should you care? We're going to talk a lot about Happo.io. It's a pretty amazing service. And we're going to talk about the Happo orb that Heinrich and his teams put together. We're going to have a live demo. Demo is awesome. And then we're going to save 10, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Next slide. Awesome. So what the heck are orbs? For those of you who are new to CircleCI, interested in CircleCI, interested in the platform, orbs effectively are shareable, templatized pieces of configuration that you can share across end projects. Historically, each and every project on CircleCI had its own configuration file, and that configuration file lived in the root directory of a project source code, right? Root directory of a project's repository. And you know, this is great for a long time. We use simple declarative YAML-based syntax. But if you think about it, this meant that every single project that you'd onboard onto the platform would have to have its own configuration file. You'd have to write a new configuration file from scratch. You'd have to beg, borrow, and steal from other configuration files. That ship has sailed. The future is now, and the future is orbs. And orbs are an amazing tool that enable you to effectively templatize pieces of your configuration, upload those pieces of configuration to an orb registry. And an example I generally use is you can think of an orb registry as a package manager for CircleCI configuration, right? So you can templatize executors. Executors are the environment in which you run code. You can templatize the steps themselves, the individual commands that are ran when you run a build. And you can templatize workflow stanzas. And a workflow, if you're coming from other CI providers, is effectively a pipeline, right? An orchestration of jobs that are connected together in some linear fashion. So a final example I want to come up with, again, just because my background is predominantly ops and infra kind of stuff, is let's say you want to standardize your deployment paradigm, right? You want to standardize a deployment to, ECS, for example. You would write out the orb, you'd templatize said configuration, you'd probably parameterize it some, and then each and every time you had a new service that you wanted to deploy to ECS, rather than reinventing the wheel and writing a config file from scratch, you could just invoke that orb. Heinrich, next slide, see if we play. Fabulous. Yeah, and this is what an orb looks like. For those of you who are familiar with CircleCI, you've seen the platform. This shouldn't be, this isn't exactly rocket science. We see our YAML here on the left, but again, just to recap, we can templatize individual commands, we can templatize the executors, and we can templatize the job declarations. And, having been with Circle for about three and a half years, I really think that this is probably one of the coolest features to have been released in the past few months. This is really, really amazing. And it's really awesome because now we have much stronger relations with a lot of community partners, people like Heinrich, other folks, they make their own orbs, and orbs, greatly facilitate integrations with the platform, right? So rather than reinventing the wheel, you just invoke the orb and you're ready to go. And then this is a list of our current partner orbs. This list is not exhaustive by any means, just disambiguate a partner orb, right? An orb, but we have a lot of strong partnerships with a lot of forward-thinking software companies and technology organizations who've written their own integrations, if you will, for CircleCI in the form of orbs. And you see a couple here: Datadog, Twistlock, Happo, and this list is not exhaustive at all.
Right.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heinrich, who's going to talk about Happo.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really a great opportunity for me to do things like this, and I want to thank CircleCI for inviting me to do this, for wanting Happel to be part of their platform. Orbs are great for me in terms of just getting simplifying things for Happel users. So getting started with CI, Happo and CI is so easy with reusable things that I can control. I can control release phases and all that. So this is really exciting for me. So who am I? I'm Henry. I think about myself as an entrepreneur, but I guess I'm an entrepreneur as well. I am the founder of Happo.io, and Happo.io was founded roughly a year and a half ago. Before that, it was a side project that I had for many years together with my then colleague, Joe Lancioni. And together we built Happo as an open source tool. And about a year and a half ago, I wanted Joe to join, but he was busy making money, I guess. But so I started Happo.io in an attempt to simplify a lot of the things that the open source tool couldn't solve. So things like cross-browser, simplifying, like having a running service so that people didn't have to invest in infrastructure, doing things like integrating with CI tools like Circle, stuff like that. So it's been really last year and a half has been really amazing for me. There are some links here to some of my social accounts. You can check them out. I do occasionally blog on Medium. And further ahead in this presentation, there'll be a link to a blog post outlining setting up Happel in a few simple steps. And the demo I'm going to give is also based on that blog post, roughly. So just shortly about me, I'm in Stockholm, Sweden. I grew up in Örnsköldsvik up north in Sweden, where I mostly played soccer. Or football, as we call it here. I graduated, I have a master's in cognitive science. I really liked artificial intelligence. I got into all that, but in the end, programming is the thing that I love doing. I had a couple of jobs in Stockholm, Sweden, and then I decided to move to the West Coast in the US. I started working for a company called Causes. Causes was a social network sort of for civic engagement, I guess, or just people wanting to do better for the world, in the world. So you could join different causes, making sure that people knew what you were passionate about. Causes later turned into Brigade, which was sadly, because just 2 days ago, I think they announced that they're shutting down. Brigade was a social network for politics. And it was during working at these two companies that I started really getting into screenshot testing. And screenshot testing was a way for me to make sure that we had a lot of engineers. We were building a lot of user interfaces. I wanted to make sure that it didn't break all the time. So I really like and still love CSS. CSS is hard. It's sort of this global styling thing where things can break in weird ways. And if you have a lot of people hacking on CSS, it's pretty common that the UI sort of deteriorates over time. So that got Happel started. I started Happel when I had moved back to Sweden. And that's where I'm right now, and here to present screenshot testing. So shortly about screenshot testing, in case you're not familiar with the term, it's sometimes referred to as visual regression testing. I try to stick with screenshot testing because it's a little bit broader. It doesn't only focus on fixing bugs. It's also about making sure that people understand the changes that you're making your team move faster by seeing the effects of a change you're making. So screenshot testing is, you take a screenshot, you make some coding change, code change, and then you take another screenshot, and then you compare those two screenshots. You can do this manually. I wouldn't do it, but that's roughly the process of screenshot testing. So automating this has been part of my life for the last 5 years. And so, oops, sorry. And some of you might have tried out screenshot testing. So traditionally, a few years ago at least, this might have changed. It's sort of me trying to make Happel look better, but by comparing it to old systems. But traditionally, screenshot testing was all about taking full page screenshots. So you basically crawled a website, you had a list of URLs, you took a screenshot, compared it, and then things like ads, counters, dates, and all stuff like that would always break the diff because you were seeing diffs all the time. So Happel took a different approach to screenshot testing by instead focusing on components. And this, when Happel started, we had just gotten started with React, and so React was part of the move into componentization that really made tools like Happel easier to produce. And so Happel will render component and component variants dynamically. It won't do a full page reload in between, which makes it a lot faster. And traditionally, you were using either Chrome, or in the past, people were also using something called Phantom.js. Firefox came along, but mostly it was just either Chrome or Firefox. Happel takes a slightly different approach by making sure that you can test your component screenshots in most major browsers. Right now, Happel has support for Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, IE 11, and then actually something that we've been testing recently is iOS Safari. And I'm sort of happy to announce that today the iOS Safari support is going out to all our users. We've been beta testing it with a couple of accounts, but today I made that release. So let's quickly move into the orb just before we start the demo. So the Happel orb basically just has one command. And that's run Happel. And so you can either use that command directly by specifying it as a step in your CircleCI config, or you can also choose to use the Happel run job. And the Happel run job will do everything you need in order to run a full Happel test. And a full Happel test involves taking screenshots for the current commit, so if you're pushing a pull request, you will take screenshots for the tip of the branch or the pull request. You will also take screenshots for the base commit if it's needed. It's not always needed, but the default job will check if we need to produce a report for the base commit as well. So it'll take screenshots for the base commit, the tip of the pull request, and then compare those two. That's the basic idea here.
Heinrich, couple of questions if we could go to back to the last slide. So firstly, congrats on launching support for what is it, Safari 11 on iOS?
It's iOS Safari, so it's iPhone Safari.
That's awesome. That's
Thanks.
awesome. Couple of quick questions here. Firstly, how long have you been a CircleCI user?
Oh, that's a good question, actually, because I got started right away with when I started building Happo.io. I got started, but I might have used it before.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I have a few projects, but it wasn't until I started building Happel full time that I really sort of used it every day. But
Gotcha.
since then, it's been a great tool for me. And so Happel is tested through Happel as well. I test my UI through Happel, and it's done through CircleCI, and it's been very stable and great from the start. And it's not until recently that I started using the orb. So that's a nice addition.
Yeah, fabulous. Couple more questions here. So Happo itself is a node module.
Yep.
Okay, gotcha. And then I guess in terms of the executor, I see the parameter there, a node Docker image. Anything else required to run Happo, or just a Docker image that has the correct version of node installed?
Yeah, nothing really. Most of the, so all the different browsers, the headless browsers and like all the browsers that you get screenshots from, they're all part of Happo.io infrastructure. So those screenshots will be run in our infrastructure and not on CircleCI. So you won't have to install any browsers. You don't have to make sure that to run things headless and stuff like that. You can just use a basic node Docker image and then invoke the commands that Happel provides.
Fabulous, fabulous. God, if we had more time, I'd probably try to pick your brain about your infrastructure and architecture and whatnot, but this is really awesome.
Okay. Okay, let's move into the demo. And as I said, and I'm guessing we can send these out later, you can also look, just Google this, this blog post. Yeah, I'll follow this, the steps outlined here.
Awesome. And then I just want to point out for those of us joining, feel free to drop some questions in the Q&A button. We're going to save time at the end to answer such questions, but if anything comes to mind, as Heinrich runs through the demo, please don't hesitate to drop a line in the QA.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions while I'm working on this. Okay. We got Vim started. We have our Tmux here. So first of all, I did some prep work for this. I've created a simple app that's running Storybook. So a lot of Happo users lately have been using a tool called Storybook. Storybook is, I guess you could call it a component library or a design system tool. It basically allows you to showcase all your components in your application in a great UI. You can play around with it. You can add new examples. In this case, I've created a project with just one button. It says "Click Me," so it's pretty bare bones. So it has a button. If you had more stories that call stories in Storybook, you would have them here. And so the reason I'm showing this is because Happel by default you can specify these component examples in a more like, there's a default way of doing this through Happel directly, but I've come to understand that a lot of people set these systems up anyway. So so this demo will be showcasing how to integrate Happel with Storybook. And so let's switch back to our editor here. So we have that component, and I have the Storybook setup running here. And then I'll just sort of go through the steps required to set up Happel, and I'm going to copy paste a few things here. Oops, go away.
Heinrich, I like your terminal plugins.
Well, shout out to my friend Shane Da Silva. He helped me set this up like a few years ago, and I haven't changed since. I'm sort of embarrassed by that, but he's great at these things. Okay, that's not what I wanted. Those stuff I need. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is install Happo and the Happel plugin Storybook. So this is a Storybook for Happel that allows you to use Storybook examples to create your Happel test suite. So while we're doing that, I'm going to switch back, and then I'm going to copy paste some Happel config, and I'll walk you through this once I'm done. Oops. Okay, so this is our Happel config file. it mostly just has a list of browsers that we want to support. And as you can see, we can specify Chrome, we have Firefox, we have Edge, IE here. IE in this case means IE 11. We have Safari, and then the new browser that just got added, iOS Safari. And then you can set screen sizes or viewport sizes as well. I'm going to use the same viewport size all over, but you can specify if you have a responsive web application, which I'm sure you all have, then you can specify different targets for different screen sizes.
I was going to ask if this supported responsive frameworks like Bootstrap. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And then the last thing we need to do, let's just fix indentation here. Actually, prettier. We'll fix that. Okay. Oops. Okay, save that file. And then let's see, what do we need to do? We also need to add a line to our Storybook config, just to let it know that Happel is active here. So we just need to do that once somewhere in our Storybook config. We import this register module. Okay, so we got that. And then before we move into the orb config, let's just make sure that we can run this once first. So Happel has a command line tool called Happo, and then you say Happel run. And what Happel will do now is it will put together a package based on the Storybook setup, and then send that to Happel to get our screenshots. So now it's just compiling basically what Storybook does by default. So it's compiling, it's using Webpack and other things. While we do that, I'm going to move into the CircleCI. And Chris, let me know if I'm misspelling something here. CircleCI config, right? YAML?
It's in a .circleci folder, and then yeah, just config.yaml.
Make that folder. Okay, let's copy paste this here. Okay, so this is the same stuff that I showed you in the slide before. This is how you specify using the Happo orb, and this is all that's the job that's being run. So we can specify that.
8 lines of config. Awesome.
Yeah, and it's all boilerplate except for this one.
Exactly. I do want to point out for folks who are interested in leveraging orbs, you definitely want to make sure you have version 2.1 specified in your config file, just because 2.1 is representative of our advanced configuration processing, i.e. orbs. And then starting on line 2, we say, hey, we're going to use an orb. Line 3 invokes the orb itself.
Yep, thanks. So while that's going on, while that's running, I'm going to just make a commit here. Let's add the CircleCI config and the Happo config. And then don't get mad at me for not writing good commit messages here. This is a demo. Okay, so we have that. Oh, sorry. We have that commit. So that was taking a while. It's still just building Storybook. So once we see here that it's sending, it's waiting for screenshots, we can switch over to looking at that. So we can, while that's going on, we can also, let's see, we have the commit. Let's push this to GitHub. And then we're going to use that, create a pull request. And remember, before this pull request, we hadn't added any Happel integration. So the result of doing this pull request should be that we get a Happel report saying that a bunch of screenshots were added, or a bunch of component variants were added. So while that's running, I don't know what's going on here. Let's see. Oh, it's doing something. Okay, so now at least it's talking to Happel. So let's switch to the pull request and just make sure that our job is running here. So this is the CircleCI job page. Job page? Is that the word? Build page?
Yes, both are correct. I think technically the term of art these days, job page, and let me just disambiguate real quick. A build can be comprised of multiple workflows. Workflows are comprised of jobs. Jobs are comprised of an executor and corresponding steps.
Okay.
And the reason I point that out is because I used the term build and job kind of interchangeably for a while until one of my good friends and product manager here at Circle was like, yeah, Chris, you can't do that anymore. Builds and jobs are, anyway, you had to be there.
Okay. Okay, we can do this. Let's switch to, okay. So we can look at the screenshots constructed for our Storybook setup. So when you run Happel local, you can run Happel locally too. Most of the time you'll run it NCI, but so we have a link to a Happel report. We can look at that report and then we can see, okay, so this is our button component. It's got screenshots throughout all the browsers that we specified. And as you can see, it doesn't look great, but this is what it's going to look like if you don't style a button much in browsers. So this is basically the default styling for buttons. And as you can see, these are also, the screenshots are cropped based on the size of the button. That's just to save space. So we'll make sure that we just crop out the contents of your component example. So we're not like wasting a lot of space here. So we have that. Let's see what happens here. Okay, and so this is our pull request. And remember, we didn't have Happel before. So Happel is now saying, okay, so we have 6 added examples, and this X basically means that you have to look at this report. So if we go to that report, let's just close a couple of things here. We'll get this comparison. And again, we can see all the screenshots that were taken. It's now saying awaiting review. We can also see that there are no diffs. There are 6 added components, variants. And then we can also do things like filter by browser. We're not going to do much of that right now. But once we find that these screenshots look okay, or this comparison looks okay, we can hit accept here, and that status is going to get cross-posted back to our GitHub pull request. So this is now all green, and it says approved by the person who hit that accept button. So this is now cool to merge. So I'm going to merge this. And once I have that merged, we're going to, let's delete that branch too. We're going to go back to our code, and then I wanted to fix the background color here. So let's go back here. Let's get our, oops, checkout master, and then we can grab the latest from GitHub. We can go to our, let's close this. We can go to our stories. Not sure what happened here. Okay, so this is our button component. We can add a background color. Let's make it white. Save that file. Let's make sure that it's looking good in our Storybook setup. Testing this locally. Oops. That's interesting. Okay, never mind. Let's not do that right now. No such file. Interesting. Okay, never mind. Let's instead turn this into a commit. Fix button background. So we commit that change, fix background on buttons. Okay, and then push that to GitHub. Let's create a pull request again with that change. Sorry. Okay, another pull request. And while we wait for the CircleCI build here, let's just go into look at this again. Do you have any questions, Chris?
I do, yeah. So I certainly appreciate the tight integration with VCS, and I'm curious, do you integrate with other VCS providers like Bitbucket?
I mean, I'm agnostic about I didn't know the term VCS, so it's what's it stand for?
Version control system.
Oh, version control system. I should have known that. Okay, yeah. The only like direct integration with GitHub is posting back that status here.
Gotcha.
Now there are ways to do that yourself. You can do that from your CircleCI command. So once the run is done, you can look at the result from Happel and then post either a comment or so we used to do a lot of comment posting in the past. Happel would post a comment saying, "Oh, I found some diffs," and that got really noisy after a while. So we moved to this status instead.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you can do stuff like that too.
Just curl post endpoint.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome.
Depending on what system you're using.
Awesome. Makes sense.
Okay.
I just want to point out real quick, generally when folks ask me, does CircleCI integrate with X? The answer really comes down to, does X have an API? If X has an API, then you can certainly script said behavior as part of your workflow or pipeline on Circle and then integrate it with other tools like Happo, for example.
Yeah. Okay, so our second run is done. So we also see a summary of the changes here. So we have 5 diffs and 1 unchanged example. So that's interesting. Let's go here and look at the Happel report. So we have, let's wait for images. So Chrome looks good, Edge, Firefox, IE, Safari, and then there's 1 unchanged, which is, so iOS Safari will had the default background color as white. So that's nice. We didn't at least we didn't make it worse here. So a couple of things about this report page. There are different ways of looking at diffs. You can use this overlay thing. It's not really helpful here because it's all background color. There's a swipe thing where you can sort of go back and forth to see exactly where the diff is. Yeah, people like different, they all have their favorite here, and they're all asking me to make it the default. So at some point, I think I'm going to make this configurable. But the good thing about this diff view here is that if you have a larger screenshot, it'll adjust the 2 images so that so let's say that you're changing something or you're removing something at the top, then Happel will align these images. Instead of just showing everything as changed, it'll align these 2 images and just show like a big red block at the top showing something got removed or added here. And then it'll sort of help you find those small subtle bugs. This is really helpful if you have a full page screenshot, because oftentimes you'll have like, we removed some padding in the middle of the page, and then if you look at it just right next to each other, everything changed, but Happel will sort of help you there. Okay, so let's, for me, this looks good. So I'm gonna accept this, and then that will get cross-posted here. I can merge this pull request, and I'm sort of done. that's basically the Happel setup, the workflow that you'll use if you use Happel. Yeah, that's basically it.
And
So link to the
awesome.
demo. And then let's move back here. So if you wanted to get started right away, you can sign up for a 30-day trial at Happel, and Happel doesn't charge you extra depending on what the type of browsers you use. So you're free to use everything, all the browsers that we have right from the start. So go ahead and try your website in IE 11. It'll be fun.
And build it on Circle. We have a pretty generous free tier as well. We give everybody on GitHub and Bitbucket a free container. I think it might be 2 free containers now. And then it's worth pointing out, obviously, for open source software and things like that, we have, a very generous free tier and whatnot. Heinrich, I want to point out, Matt posted a question. I don't know if you can see it on the QA tab on your screen.
Wait, do I have a tab? Oh, there it is. Oh, it's loading. Let's see.
I'll read it. So Matt asked, how does Happo manage testing states of elements using the button example? How would you test on hover active states? A lot of times colors change on hover, for example.
Yeah, I want to have a great answer to this. This is something that we're working on. Right now, what I've been recommending the last couple of years is that in a React world, at least, you can try to keep those states in a way that you can render components statically with the hover state sort of triggered. Now that I've come to realize that's not the answer that people are looking for. So that's definitely something that we need to work on.
Definitely, yeah. Tell me a little about your customer base. What are some of the folks who are actively using Happo? What kind of things are they working on? Are they mostly, React users?
Yeah, it's been the majority has been using React, but lately a few people using just plain web components have started showing up. We have users that aren't using our browsers. So Happel has an API where if you can produce screenshots yourself in any sort of, if you have a native app or any UI, basically, if you can produce screenshots, you can upload reports to Happel and use the reporting and the diffing tool that we provide with your own screenshots. So if you have a native app, you can also use Happel. And in terms of the size of our users, our biggest user has roughly, I don't know, 1,500 to 2,000 engineers. So there's a lot of code being pushed. They push hundreds and hundreds of reports every day. And then there are smaller ones. We have a few open source users. Happel will, if you have an open source project and you're doing some kind of UI, you can reach out to us to get a free account. We're more than happy to help out, making sure that open source UI libraries are well tested. There's one called not Material UI, Mineral UI that's been with us from the start. It's a great UI library. More people should use it. We also have people who have Happel set up to run once every day. So most people have Happel set up to run on every change or every pull request, but you can also do things like kick off a build every night at 12, just to make sure that you have a sort of, you can come to work in the morning and see, okay, what changed in our UI from yesterday? That's also a way to use it. And then in terms of company size, everything from two people in a team to thousands of people.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Going to pause for questions for a moment, but maybe while we wait for some more questions to trickle in, do you want to just walk us through the architecture of Habbo, maybe at a high level, or however far you want to go?
Sure.
The good stuff.
Yeah. So as I said, Happel provides all so we have infrastructure with all the browsers, and some of them like Chrome and Firefox, it's really easy to run these headlessly. And I'm sure a lot of CircleCI users will install Chrome and run things like UI testing and stuff in CI directly. So Firefox and Chrome are just headless browsers. They're really easy to spin up and work with. And then we have all the others basically. And most of the time we just have real like desktop computers running these browsers for IE and Edge. We're running these on Windows 10, and Safari is running on a Mac. And the thing about the new iOS Safari support is it's good to know that running it on a real device turned out to be a little bit too slow and too hard to sort of get going. So it's running inside one of those iOS simulators. And as far as I can tell, most of the bugs that you find in your phone will also show up in the simulator. And so we have all those browser workers, as we call them. And then there's the Happo.io client, the NPM client that we installed. That code is all open source. So if you wanted to sort of debug, or if you have a feature that you really need, you can look into that and push a pull request to get things changed. So we have the client, and then there's the Happo.io website and the API that the client talks to is all running. We use a service called Site. Do you know about Site? No. So they have it's really easy to sort of spin up applications and scale up and down as you go. Yeah.
I was going to ask how you handle the scale that you talked about a few moments ago, from teams of 2 guys and a people to an army of 1,000 engineers.
Yeah, that's been it's a struggle at some point. I mean, our largest account also has an on-premise Happel running on-premise, so we're not really seeing that load on Happo.io servers directly. So that's sort of one way to deal with the load, and also it's a good way to keep things secure. You don't have to send things over the internet and risk having things leak out.
Certainly.
So that's an option. And then, I guess the answer to handling the scaling up is just like always being there, ready to adjust, because like it's really hard to know what's going to scale and what's not going to scale.
Okay, yeah. I guess a couple questions about your infrastructure. Where is it hosted?
So it's mostly on the West Coast in the US.
Okay.
There are different providers. I decided to put everything there because it's closest to most of our users. So just trying to get that response time down.
Absolutely. Is most of your infra hosted in AWS, GCP, Azure, bare metal?
All over.
All over. Okay.
Yeah. We have physical servers running on a French provider. We have, it's all over.
Awesome. I joke, but when I first got my foot in the door on the DevOps SRE side of things, I jokingly tell people, just to your point a moment ago about scaling issues, I was an auto scaling group effectively, right? So I was just kind of in the matrix. I had the 2 monitors and I was just constantly staring at Datadog, constantly tweaking the knobs on the auto scaling group and whatnot. Yeah.
You've been there.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah.
Good times. One thing though, also to your point a moment ago, especially with all the different regions and availability zones at this point in time, frankly, globally distributed infrastructure, you really can minimize geographic latency by placing your servers, on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in EU West, in Japan and whatnot. Something to think about as you architect, a fairly large, non-trivial application. Those
Definitely.
things, I imagine until, AWS, for example, started operating data centers in Australia, for example, like there was significant geographical latency as a result of, I'm rambling.
Well, it's funny. I mistakenly, so I was adding another server to the mix. This was one of the, I don't remember what type it was, but I was adding one, and I accidentally added it in Belgium, I think, without knowing. And then suddenly everything got so slow because this was, so the response time between my service and when you're taking screenshots, they're all stored on AWS. So the response time between those, between the worker and the S3 bucket, basically, is really critical. And it was way too long. That was interesting, but I figured it out.
So the screenshots themselves, for example, are stored on S3. And I'm just curious, how large, what's the file size associated with some of these screenshots? I imagine the resolution and whatnot, that's probably very variable.
Yeah, it is. I can't say for sure. The thing about, so Happel tries to, there are a couple of things we do to try to get that size down, not by compressing images. We basically don't, we just use whatever the screenshot tool that we're using is giving us, because that's the fastest way. But we sort of rely on the fact that most UI don't change. So let's say you have a UI consisting of 100 different component examples. Over time, it's likely that these 100 variants will only have, let's say, 10 to 20 different versions over time. So most of them will stay stable. And if they stay stable, we're not storing them twice. We're just storing them once. And that's really key to making it faster to store these images, produce these images. Because if we don't have to store it, then we can just skip it. We know that it's there. Right. And so we can use caching and stuff. And then also, when we look at things like comparison screens, the Happel report that I showed you, we can dynamically compare two different reports just based on the URLs to the images. So the image URL consists of, part of the URL is a hash of the image. So if the contents of the image isn't changing, then the hash won't change, so the URL won't change.
Okay, that's super interesting. I'm curious. Again, I'm like a total like back-end dude. I think my personal website and blog, which my girlfriend, mom, and like a couple of my close personal friends read, that's like pushing the extent of my front-end knowledge. So I'm curious, when you hash an image, is it just some kind of algorithm based on pixels, or?
It's just an MD, sorry.
Oh,
MD,
of the file itself. Yeah, no,
the file. Right. So the contents of the file.
Gotcha. That makes
whatever sense. Is fastest. I can't say if it's MD5 or whatever, but just
presumably. Okay, yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
So that works most of the time. There are cases where this is sort of interesting, because a while ago I was upgrading some browser, and the browser itself produced the exact same pixels, but it didn't compress the file exactly the same way. So suddenly people were seeing diff that weren't actually diffs. So that's sort of a quirk with this approach. But that happens very, very rarely. So it's something that we can sort of live with.
Interesting. Another question came in, and again, we're almost at time, folks. So if there are any other thoughts, questions, comments, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. But somebody asked, I would love to know how Habbo can help in complex SPA component state designs. Do you have plans to integrate UI simulators for different state of the components for a different state of the components?
I'm not sure I follow the question. So SPA is single page application, and then
Yeah,
how we can test different states of that application.
correct.
And the question is, do we sort of provide tools that allow you to navigate that single page application?
Yeah. And then the second half was, do you have plans to integrate UI simulators for different state of the components?
Oh, I don't actually know what that would refer to, the UI simulators. Do you know?
Generally, when I think UI simulator, and I'm shooting from the hip here, and if you want to elaborate on that question some, please. Generally, when I think of UI simulators or emulators, if I'm like debugging my website in Chrome and I have the ability to look at, to see how it would look on like a iPhone 10 or an iPhone 9 or a Galaxy Note, whatever.
Oh,
I could totally be incorrect in my assumption.
yeah. Oh, that's a cool idea. So one thing that I've been thinking about lately is, if we look at I can't bring up the Storybook setup, but if we look at the Storybook thing, I wanted to provide a button somewhere on that screen saying, what does this component look like in IE 11 right now? Whatever you're seeing on the screen, what would it look like? And I guess maybe that's sort of the answer to the question. And I guess that could sort of be a browser plugin or anything that just sort of, because Happel can screenshot whatever the DOM is producing, and then we can see how that looks like in different browsers. I'll make a note of that. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. Almost out of time here. I just have one more question about the company itself. How many folks do you have currently at Happo? Two.
Yeah. It's me and my co-founder, Olga.
Oh, wonderful. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Plans to expand.
I mean, yeah, we're self-funded.
Awesome.
There's no VC funding or anything involved here, and so we're sort of taking this slow, I guess. I mean, that's my plan. I want this to turn into a larger company. I want to scale this up. That would be great.
Yeah. Awesome. Heinrich, unless there are no other questions, unless you have any final thoughts, I want to thank everybody for joining. Heinrich, I really want to thank you for joining us today. This was absolutely awesome. And that was a really good live demo that we went through to kind of contextualize all the things.
Yeah. Thank you. I thank you for having me. It was great fun.
Yeah.